Another key point that the world holds to is evolution. We came from monkeys, billions of years. Problem with that is, it's not scientific. And the problem with Christians is, they don't bone up on the interesting points of view that can refute that. Take a look at the table of contents that's part of the study I did that begins with an important perspective. And probably this is all you need to know. Get into the details of how stars came up there and how come the dual stars that hang around to each other that are obviously not that old, and yet they seem to have come from the beginning of the universe. So that kind of conflicts with the idea of evolution, which needs a lot of time. Anyway, you can go into those details and at least get to the creation versus evolution arguments that are basic in general. Only two positions to choose from, creationism or evolution, but only one is logical. It's easy to be an atheist when you don't stop and think seriously about where everything came from. Many scientists say that nature is all there is, and it came from the Big Bang, but they mostly don't say where it came from. Some say it came from nothing. Others reject that, saying it came from prior events, but they don't say where they came from. So others they say they came from an infinite, eternal series of prior events, or we don't know. Why is that such a great point of view? Well, these cosmogonies are not observable, so they're not real science. Get that? You can make up all the stories you want. Now you have to go and to prove out which is the best and most scientific and logical by evidence. Worse, they are logically impossible. Nothing can't be or do anything. An infinite causal regress is a logical fallacy. So they are really just irrationally dressed up in a lab coat. See how important these... Now you don't have to go too much further than this. The key word is evidence. What evidence do you have of one thing leading to another over a long period of time? So now we observe that nature is a series of dependent material events. So every series or event has a beginning. So we know nature began. So prior to that, nature did not exist, so it could not have begun itself. Point, right? Point taken. Thus nature would never have come to exist unless some whatever exists. How about a chief designer, God of the Bible? There is more to reality than nature, and so naturalism is false. Now, to solve regress, what does whatever logically and ultimately have to be? Whoever wholly independent, beginningless, non-series event, non-material, all-powerful, and agential. As such, unlike everything else, there is nothing about whatever which could or needs to begin in order for it to exist. I'm using the word whatever instead of God, because then somebody would say, well, which God? Because we have different religious effects. Then we get into a discussion that's not observable and not as scientific and logical as I'd like to stay away from multiple subjects spoken of at the same time, because that becomes disoriented and of little productivity. Therefore, whatever has necessarily eternally existed, and thus could not have come from anywhere. So our gods, polytheistic gods, aren't because they are codependent and have their own regress issues. Similarly, pantheistic gods aren't because they are tied to nature, but a supernatural monotheistic God is a perfect God. Let's go down and fix that word there. Fix that sentence. Moving on, suppressing this sound truth without an equally workable or better solution is often not the result of reason, but of metaphysical bigotry and or rebellion. Just make up your own stories and give a metaphysical characteristic to it. But if it's got no evidence to support it, it's not worthwhile listening to. Now, given that our 5 human senses and science can't perceive anything beyond nature, how can we know this supernatural God? Well, a few religions speak of such a God, but talk is cheap. Much like science can't show you how nature or life began, so too is any religion that can't show you God's supernatural power. Unlike them, Jesus can deliver. Interestingly, by the way, we talk about the Bible. Oh, you talk about the Bible. Well, I'll take the Bible so far. I've investigated it thoroughly, and you better too, because then you can say, I've investigated it thoroughly, and then say, so far I found no errors or contradictions, perfect record of prediction of the future, and a reflection of historical events without error, and no contradiction anywhere on theological matters. Only he has paid what we owe, rose from the dead, lives, and has proved it to millions of people for thousands of years by showing them some of the same kinds of supernatural wonders and miracles described in the Bible. So we have eyewitness testimonies in the Bible, especially. You're observing such things with your own eyes is far more proof. Like the word "your." Observing such things with your own eyes is far more proof, far more real, and far more beautiful, and better than anything the peddlers of naturalism, atheism, pre-bangs, abiogenesis, that's macroevolution, other religions, philosophies. How about a G there? I wrote this many months ago, years ago. Other religions, philosophies, drugs, alcohol, Hollywood, hedonism, other sins than the devil can show you. All these imaginary things that are supported by things of the world. Get a little, take a drug or two. Remember the psychedelic drugs, and you can imagine anything. Then turn around, wake up, and you think it was true. But what evidence do you have? Dr. Patton states in his video, when we study origins, we find that there are 2 competing ideas, creation and evolution. Philosophically, there are only 2 ideas. Patterson, this theory, or evolution, has only one main competitor, creation theory. They're both neither are theories, because the theory can be observable, falsifiable, and duplicatable, repeatable. So, creation theory versus evolution, creation versus evolution. Though there are, I'd like to say the word model. Well, it's in the quotation. Though there are different stories of how the Creator went about his work. So you go to various books on that. The one most plausible is one without error or contradiction, the Bible. Eldridge speaks of, indeed, the only competing explanation for the order we see all see in the biological world is the notion of special creation. And Dr. D.J. Futimar, creation and evolution between them exhaust the possible explanations for the origin of living things. Organisms either appeared on Earth fully developed, or they did not. If they did not, they must have developed from pre-existing species from some process of modifications. If they did appear in a full developed state, they must have been created by some omnipotent intelligence. We don't find much capacity, evidence rather, for evolution to go over and go into more and more complex beings, living beings, plant, animals, because we see things devolving, not evolving, from more complicated to less complicated, not the other way around. Both ideas have religious implications so far then. And Patton says, but then we're sometimes told that in the science classroom that you can only have evolution because that's scientific, whereas creation is religious. Both of them have very serious and religious implications, because science, to be scientific, has to be observable, repeatable, and falsifiable. And neither, I don't call them theories, I call them models. Guesstimates, complicated guesstimates, have scientific evidence behind them that can say absolutely one or the other is correct. So Huxley, in the evolutionary pattern of thought today, there's no longer either need or room for the supernatural. The earth was not created, it evolved. So did all the animals and plants that inhabit it, including our human selves, mind and soul, as well as brain and body. So did religion. Huxley, membership, I use the word humanist to mean someone who believes that man is just as much a natural phenomena as an animal or plant, that his body, mind, and soul were not supernaturally created, but are products of evolution. But see, he's ruled it out. So the only thing left is evolution. But how do you rule it out? I just say so. When you're famous, you can say so. They're products of evolution, and that he is not under the control or guidance of any supernatural beings, but has to rely on himself and his own powers. Of course, we've seen this not to be the case historically. This is obviously a belief statement which has religious implications. And Ernst Mayr, he says, evolution does not give us a complete set of ethical norms, such as the Ten Commandments, yet an understanding of evolution gives us a worldview that can serve as a sound basis for the development of an ethical system. Really? That's trash talk. That's ridiculous. I mean, what do you get from one species that evolves into another? What ethical system do you get for that? And there's no actual proof that one species has led to another. Similarities, but so dissimilar, more so than similar, that you can't say it actually evolved from something else. So evolution is presented here as the basis for an ethical system. It's promoted by survival of the fittest. Why is that ethical? So the bully wins. Power makes right. The struggle for survival does have religious implications. Defining terms is critical in determining the order to determine the truth about origins. We're looking at origins still. Variation within a species is not the same as evolution. Let me say that again. Variation within a species is not the same as evolution. You still have a bird, different colored beak, or whatever, right? Patton's videos. Kirkut. There is a theory which states that many living animals can be observed over the course of time to undergo changes so that new species are formed. Wow. This can be called the special theory of evolution and can be demonstrated in certain cases by experiments. Now Patton says, boy, now he's talking about what we call normally variation, horizontal variation. He, Kirkut, calls it the special theory of evolution. Yeah, and yes, that kind of variation can be demonstrated by experiments. Things that one would call horizontal variation are called new species. However, they're the same kind as that which was there in the beginning, but we see variation. Kirkut. On the other hand, there is a theory that all living forms in the world have arisen from a single source which itself came from an inorganic form. This theory can be called the general theory of evolution. Now, Patton says, now that's a different idea entirely. Unfortunately, we find in much of the argumentation people who use the special theory in their arguments and then switch in the middle of the sentence to the general theory in their conclusions. The real issue is a change from one kind to another kind. For example, we would see the amoeba changing to the shark, changing to the monkey, changing to the man. And that's not variation. That's change from one kind to another kind. Likewise, we see various types of monkeys and various types of people. That's predicted when we see, ever heard of DNA? Because DNA wasn't around when these people were making these arguments. So, that's predicted when we study individuals from the same kind. In addition to the study of the theory of change from one kind to another, we also involve the idea of origin from a common source. That is all coming from the same thing. Dobzhansky, defining evolution, says evolution comprises all the stages of the development of the universe, the cosmic, the biological, and human or cultural developments. Life is a product of the evolution of inorganic nature, and man is a product of the evolution of life. So what's the philosophy of inorganic nature? Have you spoke to something inorganic lately? Evolution from primordial life through unicellular and then multicellular organisms, invertebrate and vertebrate animals, to man. That is the picture then. The issue is not simple variation. Unfortunately, much of the argumentation is simple variation.